guest is Parshall Perry.
Every mother's life at a certain point feels like it's falling apart. Everybody's path gets sandy.
Share the gospel clear and strong. Stand for, claim your heritage of truth.
Welcome to Heritage of Truth. Today my guest is Parshall Perry. Welcome, Sarah.
Welcome. Thanks for having me.
Now, that middle name, Parshall, that's your maiden name because
Right.
you were the daughter of Craig and Janet Parshall.
Correct.
So you come by what you do honestly, writing and everything
Writing
else.
and lawyering and speaking and doing a lot of those things.
Yes.
It's
Okay,
very
well-
loud when I go to visit them. A lot of people talking.
You have a new book called Sand in My Sandwich and Other Motherhood Messes I'm Learning to Love. Now, one of the things that struck me right away is I love your writing voice.
Oh,
You're
thank
so
you.
natural and funny.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed reading what I've read of this book. It's really good. So tell me, why did you write this book?
Well, I had started writing for a ministry called Chosen Families. And what led me to the ministry was that it was dedicated to people who had hidden disabilities. So she was working, a very good friend of mine was working for this ministry, and it was for people who had family members with autism or ADHD or dyslexia or bipolar disorder, things that can't be seen but are very impactful in everyday life. Well, as it turns out, God had placed two very unique children in my life, two boys, both of whom are on the autism spectrum. And I came to her and I said, would my writing be of benefit to you? And she jumped at the chance and said, I would love for you to write for us. Well, I found the blog posts sort of forming themselves into the shell of a manuscript. And I thought, I really feel like the Lord's calling me to tell this story because it's not just about autism, it's about how every mother's life at a certain point feels like it's falling apart. Everybody's path gets sandy, and this was my story of how things had to fall apart before they got back together the right way.
Oh, well, I actually underlined some things that I thought were so funny, the way you said them. Like, you have to be pretty committed to going down with the vessel to ignore the part of you that's fighting the urge to scan the deck for the life rafts.
Which is a metaphor for my marriage, for those of you who are listening.
Yeah, I mean, that was really good. Okay, this is a good one. Mine is the story of every parent's life because every kid is expensive and requires special treatment, and every kid, whether you want to admit it or not, can push you to the point of locking yourself in the bathroom so you can surf the internet and finally get around to clipping your toenails.
All true and have happened to me, I just want you to know. I mean, listen, there is one place of refuge where I can lock the door. Although my youngest has figured out that he slips his fingers underneath and then just kind of wiggles them and then will stick his face under and say, are you done yet? Are you done yet? And I could be doing anything. I could be sitting on the edge of the bathtub. I could be texting a girlfriend. I could be writing a list. Are you done yet? So yes, it is one of the few sanctuaries in my home. My bed is used for wrestling matches. So my husband and I made an investment in a bed we thought was one of those grown-up purchases, and my children like to leap off the headboard. So, you give up a lot when you have kids, but it pays out in the end, that's for sure.
Yeah, it does. Well, you're very transparent in this book, and you use a lot of humor and that kind of stuff. Would you explain why you were willing to share all the difficulties, the challenges, and all this personal stuff?
Well, my husband and I came from two very different perspectives growing up. I liked to joke that mine was more the ivory tower mentality, okay? So I held things very close to the vest. Part of it's my personality. Part of it's that I'm firstborn. Part of it's the profession that I saw. Everything was sort of tight-laced when I was in law school. You find yourself slotted into a certain professional mold. And when I met my husband, who will just as easily answer the door in his pajamas as he will in actual clothes, and can be unshowered with cowlicks in 8 directions because his attitude is, we welcome all comers at all the time. Your boundaries get stretched a little bit, and I have found that the things that have been troubling and painful and difficult in my life have actually worked to bless other people. And so I'm reminded of the verse that says we hold this treasure in jars of clay to show that the power is from God and not from us, because I will leak the treasure all the time. It'll fall out, and God will continue to pour me up. He will fill me up all the time. And my brokenness, I am hoping, is a blessing to other people. I don't think there's a value in keeping a facade. I don't have the energy for it. I cannot be that kind of person who's one public person and then one private person, because it's just too exhausting. So this was really a bit of a catharsis for me, because so much of it was my ability to go, oh, here's all the ugly and unpleasant stuff. You can take it. You know, Nora Ephron wrote once that if you slip on a banana peel, people laugh at you. But if you write about slipping on a banana peel, you own the laugh. So this was part of me owning the laugh.
Oh, that's great. So tell me a little bit about each of your children.
Well, Noah is my oldest. He's 11, and he is my remarkable, pensive, mysterious, thoughtful, very driven young man. He was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, ADHD, OCD, and oppositional defiance disorder when he was almost 6. And I recognized this very early on. I felt the Lord prompting me a little bit. And they call it mother's intuition for a reason. Mm-hmm. We know it is the Holy Spirit, because he's going, listen up, you know. So I learned to trust my instincts in subsequent situations. But with Noah, I said to Matt, listen, the hand flapping, the late walking, the late talking, you know, he's not making eye contact. I think there's something going on. Well, it was written off to neurotic first-time mother syndrome. And I like to joke, you know, for the one time that you're neurotic, it'll pay off, because that'll be the time that's important. So I'd rather be a little neurotic and just make sure I've covered my bases. Well, in this instance, we finally got around to making an appointment with the Kennedy Krieger Institute, and they are affiliated with Johns Hopkins Hospital. Mm-hmm. So we went to their CARD center, their Center for Autism and Related Disorders, and in the first day of evaluation, and it was extensive, it was probably 6 hours of testing. He saw a number of different specialists. Without skipping a beat, my doctor said, Asperger's, OCD, ADHD, and ODD. But it's a good thing you came in here early, because we can help him figure out how to navigate this. And it was one of those, wait, could I just pick myself up off the floor first? Because my heart knew it, but my brain had not yet acquiesced to it. We were in two sort of conflicting inner perspectives. I actually think Matt took it harder than I did. Mm-hmm. Because as our firstborn child and as the son, I think my husband had visions of what he would be like when he grew up. And with all those diagnoses, you think, well, that dream's just completely out the window. Mm-hmm. And I actually quote a poem by Emily Pearl Kingsley called Welcome to Holland. And it's like preparing for a trip to one country. You know, if you're going to Italy and you're thinking about eating cannoli and you're learning to speak Italian and you're dreaming of visiting the Colosseum, and the plane doors open and all you see is windmills and wooden shoes, and somebody says, welcome to Holland, you're like, well, this is beautiful, but I don't know how to speak the language, and this wasn't what I was ready for. So after a while, you learn to get very comfortable in Holland. And Noah is the most remarkable child. I can't say anything but wonderful things about him, and he has given me exceedingly amazing perspective on things, because he sees the world in a prism, whereas I see it as just a single ray of light. So my daughter Grace is our middle child. I call her our neurotypical child. So she doesn't have any of these diagnoses, and it doesn't matter, because she makes herself heard and heard and heard. As the middle child, the only girl and the only neurotypical child, my daughter would be heard screaming 10 doors down if she wanted to be heard. She is determined. She has been told she is a little bossy. I like to refer to it as leadership qualities in training. She is courageous. She is leap before you look. She is funny. She loves fashion. And she really is a blessing to me, because there is something special about a mother-daughter relationship. Oh, yes. And then there's Jesse, and Jesse is my 6-year-old, and he looks like Opie from the old television show. He has freckles and lop ears and dimples and blue eyes and blonde hair, and he is my whole heart, because you can't help but really dote on your baby. And I try not to, but he was diagnosed at 3.5 on a higher level of functionality than Noah was. And part of the blessing in that is that we were seeing the same neurologist who said, these things tend to run in families. Why don't you just continue to bring Jesse in? Well, when I noticed some of the same behaviors, this time a little bit different, because kids on the spectrum are very different. There are so many different shades of autism. He was spinning. He was very aggressive toward other children, very hostile. His walking was much later. His gross motor problems were worse. We took him in, and the doctor said, yes, he's definitely in the spectrum. And then I went, oh, Lord, really? 2? Like, 1 was not enough? You're going to double my portion? I know there's a reason for this, but right now it just really hurts. And I look at all my children now, and as every mother does, I'm convinced I would never have them any other way. They are my pride and joy.
And so have they, with the doctor's help, have they actually been able to function on a more normal level?
They have. In fact, we've taken certain actions to help them function at their absolute best. So both boys, as Asperger's kids, and now the DSM's taken it out. They just call it now ASD, which is Autism Spectrum Disorder. But my boys were diagnosed before it just was lumped under that umbrella. So I still think of them as kids with Asperger's, because that's, who they are to me. It's the easiest way for me to understand where they're coming from. But they have been benefited in 2 ways. First, that I responded to that prompting, because early intervention is critically important, because the goal for all of these kids, as it is for any kid, is independence and self-sufficiency. So if I get them to a doctor at 6 and 3 and the doctor says, yes, let's start, and Matt and I developed a plan, which is what we did, and it was occupational therapy and physical therapy, and it was group dynamics, and we had wonderful therapists that we just know God just handpicked for us. We didn't even have to search. It was just like, should we? And then someone would make a recommendation and it would turn out to be perfect. We held Noah back a grade level, which to this day he says he will never forgive me for, because he's very indignant that he's the oldest child in his class. But it really did give him an academic advantage, and it gave him an emotional and developmental advantage, because he was caught behind a lot of his peers. And we've actually gotten them involved in sports. Now, my children, I will never say, are the most athletically gifted, but the strength of having to practice in football or trying to catch with small lacrosse balls and tiny nets, wonderful hand-eye coordination, wonderful for gross and fine motor skills. So we've kind of cobbled together pieces that have been what's worked for them. And so much of this is just, again, as with any child, getting down on your knees and going, okay, Lord, it's not really my kid. You gave him to me to steward. I don't know what I'm doing. And I had moments where I would lay in bed and think, Lord, I don't know what I'm doing. I mean, I'm new at all of this. I didn't think I'd have to navigate a disability with one child, let alone with 2, and then a handful of them between the 2 of them. So I just attribute the successes that we've had to really listening to Holy Spirit prompting and him just pointing the way. And it is really enough light for the next step. And then you think, okay, driving, that'll be a different situation. We'll deal with that when we get to it. Dating, God help us. I don't know what that'll look like, but right now, I just wanted him to get through math class with something more than a C or a D, and by God's grace, he ended the year on honor roll with a B. Thank you, Lord. So we're doing great.
That's good. Well, how about Grace? Obviously, we have challenges with all children.
Right.
So has it been, with the attention you have to give to the 2 boys, how have you balanced all that?
Oh, that has been an interesting challenge. Grace and I have found a shared love of horses together, and we both ride horses, and on the days that we go to the barn together or we spend weekends traveling for shows, they are some of my favorite days of the whole year. It's just the 2 of us. The boys have no interest. My husband has no interest, though he is supportive. I will say that for him. And we are up at the crack of dawn before the sun rises, and we smell like manure and we're dirty and sweaty and we have to hold our horses all day. But I'm telling you, it has been such a joy. And that's another thing where I think the Lord's just opened up an opportunity for us to spend dedicated, consistent time together. I've also seen the value of transparency in our lives played out in our children, because I did get my daughter recently to admit to me that the reason she screams is for attention. Now, I can be with her. We can spend the day together. She's good as gold, just a lamb. I can take her anywhere. It would be fabulous. If she's around her brothers and there is so much as a poke in the arm, she goes completely ballistic. Again, I think this is common fare in any child's household, but she has admitted to me she screams to get attention, and sometimes she fakes not feeling well to get attention. So I've said to her, if this is how you feel, if you feel like you're not getting enough attention or mommy and daddy are too distracted with the boys, will you please come tell me and we can talk about it? And you'd be surprised at how much children understand. She's mature anyway, but kids, they're such sponges. They soak all of that up. And so the simplicity of an offer like, come to me and tell me, and we will work it out, has just been hugely beneficial. So dedicated time and transparency have really kind of helped us navigate that path.
I think it's so important to let your kids know that they can talk to you about
Yes.
anything,
Yep.
as long as it's respectful.
Right.
Yeah. Well, you started out deciding to be a lawyer, but then you weren't so excited about that decision at
Right.
one point. Tell us about that.
Well, I started out committed to the starry-eyed law school student notion of making a difference, right? That's why everybody goes to law school. We all want to make a difference. We're going to change the world. Well, as you stated, I come by it honestly because my father's been a litigator for 40-odd years. And I really looked up to him, followed in his footsteps, joined with a small civil litigation firm, practiced for 2 years, but felt sort of an unrest professionally. And I didn't know if it was the work that I was doing or it was the level of mundacity that no one prepares you for. And trust me, lawyers have a high tolerance for drudgery, okay? We can read a lot of stuff that's boring in the course of a day. But something felt off to me. It just didn't feel fulfilling. Well, as it turned out, at my brother's wedding, I had at some point developed mononucleosis and was running a fever of 104. When I got to the emergency room the day after his wedding, I had an enlarged spleen and my white count was through the roof. And they said, you're going to need to be on bed rest for at least 4 weeks. And my first thought was, I don't have to go to work. I'm so excited. Now, when you think that is your first thought, you probably have to prioritize your priorities. So I was laying in bed going, okay, Lord, what am I going to do with this next path of my life? And I thought, okay, well, I've always been fascinated with advertising. No experience in advertising, never done it before. Looked through a paper, submitted some resumes, and got a job with an advertising and marketing firm, and they needed in-house counsel to write contracts and licenses, but they also needed someone to handle business development. So I looked like the perfect fit. So I worked for them for another 4 years until I got pregnant with Noah, thinking I was going to go back to work. And then I had Noah, and I went, oh no. No. I cannot leave this person. I was so blissfully head over heels in love with this child. I could not be away from him long enough to take a shower. Like, I would put him in the bouncy seat and I'd have the curtain half open just so I could stare at him. So I was shocked and blown away by the level of immediate attachment I had for this child. I could not envision going back to work. And thankfully, the Lord had provided in such a way that I had a 401k that we cashed out. We had to sell a car, and we had to make some very heavy-duty sacrifices. But I look back now and I think, never saw it coming with 2 kids on the spectrum. Now I realize why the Lord said, I'm going to put you here because you are going to be needed here. And the advertising agency I was working on was acquired 6 months later, and they laid off half the staff. Wow. So I was like, thanks for the light bulb, God. I really appreciate the direction. So I find myself now, once my kids are in grade school full time, really going back to my first passion, which was writing. My undergraduate was in journalism, and I'm about to complete the manuscript for my third book, which is sort of the prequel to Sand in My Sandwich. It's about that transition, that everything sort of flying off the rails when you have kids because you don't anticipate how you'll love them. Even though you've been a working gal your whole life, that prequel is going to be out next year. But my first love has always been writing, and I actually find myself now doing work for the Family Research Council in DC, doing a lot of their writing and editing and managing 2 of their internal coalitions. And this is what I grew up hearing from my parents. Again, made a promise to myself, I'm not going to get involved in all that policy and legal stuff. And I commute to Washington, D.C. twice a week now. So never say never is the rule of that.
What was it like growing up as their child?
Oh, well, it was very loud. If you were to come in and sit down at our table and have dinner with us, you probably would not get a word in edgewise. I think we all naturally have a flair for the dramatic. I mean, my parents really met doing high school theater, so they both have a very dramatic, artistic flair to them. My mother, one of my mother's degrees is actually in music, so she's a fantastic performer. My dad did a ton of theater. So our house is dramatic, it is loud, it is effusive, but it is very passionate, very loving. And we're the kind of people who, if we commit to something, we are 110% in immediately. That's just how we are. And I think it's been great not only for my professional development, because I'll get the idea of, I think I'll work in advertising. Like, I've never done that before, but sounds like a great idea. Research all the advertising agencies, craft a cover letter, tweak the resume, go on some interviews. I was 100% sold in. That's a characteristic that was taught to me by my parents, and it's something I am hoping to pass down to my own kids. I realize now, as I'm older and in my 4th decade of life, that you get to a point where you can look back at your parents, and it's too bad they're not here to hear this. I'll have to send them to the link so that they can listen to this, where you go, all of that stuff was a real good lot of material. There was a ton of really good parenting in there. At the time, all you can think about is, why is my curfew 11 o'clock? But now I look back with children of my own and I think, they did a great job. So it pays off. That's an encouragement to the parents listening.
Right. There's a little history with when you were in school, your mother had to go and try and fight for your rights.
Yes. In fact, my parents started their development in public policy with an organization, a small home-run organization called People for Basic Education. My mother was the PTA president, and she was your typical Leave It to Beaver, cookie baking, fundraising mother, and got involved in more of a level of curriculum and development when I started coming to her in what was then the 80s, about the mid-80s, with what I now look back and realize was the guidance-based, values-based education of that period of time. In fact, the Common Core State Standards are sort of the newest iteration of that. Everything's sort of fungible. It was focused more on what you think, what you feel, sort of a fluid notion of what's right and what's wrong. And my 5th grade teacher passed around what she called her magic scarf. And when it landed on you, you had to answer the question that was asked of you by the teacher. And she asked me, if your parents were divorced, what parent would you pick to live with and why? Well, I said, I don't want to answer that because they're not going to get divorced. And also, this makes me very uncomfortable. Well, I went home and my parents had a field day. I mean, to say that their heads exploded would just be a hair shy of the truth. So my mother said, this is ridiculous. I'm president of the PTA. I can't believe what they're teaching. It worked its way into my math class, where my teacher submitted a test to us in 7th grade that was strictly based on the notion of how to reason logically. And one of the questions was, you have a life raft that can only seat 5, but you have 6 people. Who do you kick out of the raft? And there were various races, various ideologies, various professions, and you had to pick which ones were going to live and which were going to die. This was completely irrelevant to math. So my friend Carlos was sitting behind me. Carlos's father was a judge. My father's an attorney. I write on the paper, I do not feel comfortable answering this question because I feel it's a violation of my personal privacy. If you have any questions, you can call my father at his law office at, and sent the form back. And Carlos, sitting next to me, said, I don't think you can do that. I said, well, I just did, and your daddy would probably tell you to do the same thing. So that was the germination of an idea, really to change the world, to realize that our culture was shifting. And again, at the time, you don't realize when your parents come home from Washington and they're talking using all of the acronyms you don't understand, the extent of what that means until you grow up and you go, wow, based on what's happening with the Supreme Court, what's happening in Congress right now, the executive orders our president has issued, our culture is changing, and very quickly, the religious minority, the conservative Republican, the Christian, the evangelical is being pushed to the fringe of the free market. We're the new okay to minimize minority. And that's something that my work with FRC has really been dedicated to changing.
Wow. If you were to say to a mother who doesn't have children that have autism or any problem like that, why they would want to read this book, what would you say to them?
Oh, well, first of all, I think I'm funny, but if my husband were here, he would say he's the funnier one. But he's not, so I'm going to say it's funny. You'll get a couple of good laughs because the transparency issue, I think, works as well for here's the ugly stuff as it does for the here's the hilarious stuff, because there is funny stuff about autism too, but there's funny stuff about parenting, and that's really the journey of this book. It's not just about autism. It's about every mother's journey, because every mother's path at some point will encounter some of that sand. It will be gritty and dirty and messy, and it won't be neat and easy to control, and that's the thing about kids. They don't come with operating instructions, and they are solely self-motivated. You can't wind them up and program them. They just come out thinking their own way and doing their own thing, and that's the way they're designed. But my desire in writing this was really to show people how the messes of parenting are beautiful, because God is the only order in chaos. And so he took what I wanted a perfectly ordered life to be, what I had planned for and put together with so much dedication, and just one by one pulled the pins out until everything fell apart. And I went, all right, Lord, well, you're the only thing that's going to put things back together. It wasn't until I really felt like I was down on my knees that the Lord said, finally, it took you long enough. Now we can talk about this. So it really is every parent's journey through the mess, and how when we look to him, that's the way things come back together the right way.
Great book. Okay, now, where can people find you online?
A couple of different places. My Twitter handle is at Sarah P. Perry. My website is Sarah Perry Writes, and I have a Facebook page as well. That's Sarah Perry Author. Just type it in the browser, it'll come up.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your willingness to come and interview with us.
You're welcome.
Great talk. I
It
really
was
enjoyed
fun.
it.
It was fun. Thank you
Okay.
for having me.
Thank you.
Share